to the cloud. So if you have any comments as well, put them in the chat. I'll try and do a better job this time of staying across the chat, as will Ian Robertson, to just keep me aware if you've got any questions you'd like to cover them off, but don't want to sort of share them directly. Just say that and we'll deal with them anonymously for you. Okay, let me show you a couple of slides first of all, and then we'll get into the call, just so you can see what we know. Share screen. So in terms of the culture today, let me show you this. Can you see the slides?
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay. So again, a fairly even spread of people. You can see last week there was a little more in the Verify drive. I guess maybe because we're dealing with verifiers, I'm not sure. It's just, you know, a few different people, but a good cross representation of all 4 drives. Just so you know, anytime we see a team that's got this type of diversity, you know the raw ingredients are there to have a real synergistic output from that team. Often it's very dominant in one particular direction or two, like it might be strong verify or avoid complete, or you know, any of the 4. But it's really always fun when you see a good representation of all 4 drives like this. Today we're going to deal with the Authenticate drive, and this is the matrix that we'll post up onto the website and share with you afterwards. But I've got a number of things I'm going to share in each of these columns, and I actually thought of an additional category that I haven't mentioned for the verified drive that I do want to talk about today, and that's what I would call the burden of each drive. If there's a genius factor for each drive, there's also a burden that we carry. You know, like each of us have something we go, that's just who I am. That thing's never going to leave me. It drives me nuts, you know, but it's just who I am. And I think it's cool to just be aware of what that is. So I'm going to cover that here, and I can go back and backtrack some of the material for the verified drive as well. Are there any questions or comments from anybody before we kick off? Maybe go off mute if you are, if you'd like to share something. Okay, so with that, let's get underway. So the Authenticate drive, to authenticate means to make real, to make authentic. So what you feel and think and have on the inside is the same as on the outside. The picture, there's a couple of pictures that we use for this. One is a tree. So the tree has got what you see above the ground, the trunk, the branches, the leaves, but it's also got that, you know, significant root system underground that you can't see. Now, we all know that that exists because we know what a tree is, but in life, there's what you see and experience above the surface, like what people say that would be above the surface. And there's what they really were trying to say, or what their true feelings, true thoughts were, and that's often not as visible. So you've got the visible of the authenticate and the invisible of the avoid authenticate. So in terms of how those drives work together, the authenticate is like above the ground, so the trunk, the branches, the leaves. The avoid authenticate is what's going on beneath the surface. So that's one picture that we use. The other picture is an iceberg. So there's what's above the ground, above the water in terms of what we see with an iceberg, but there's often so much more that's under the surface. But when we don't know what it is, that can cause a lot of conflict. And obviously an authenticator doesn't go looking for what's beneath the surface. They just take you literally well, what you said is what you mean. They go with what's above the surface. And it's the avoid authenticate that's more likely to, they instinctively believe that there's more beneath the surface, even if there isn't. Even if you've said what you've meant and you've been very literal, it's the avoid authenticate drive that's vulnerable to reading into things and looking for more depth than what might actually be there. So let's just work through this now in terms of explaining elements of the drive. So the first is sort of the traits that come from that. So that if the drive is not just to be on the outside, be external, the drive is to take what is the theory and make it practical, the thoughts and make it actions. It's like, just like a verifier wants to take the wrongs and make them right. The thing with an authenticator is to take what everyone's sort of talking about and turn it into a practical, useful, tangible result. Talking and not doing drives authenticators nuts. That's why meetings, you know, where there's no practical, tangible action or result that comes from it, feels like a total waste of time. And wastage is one of the biggest things that demotivates an authenticator. They're all into being, you know, not just useful, but efficient. So everything is, there's just no wastage of resources, no wastage of words, no wastage of time. That's the opposite to being useful. You know, they're useful, efficient, productive. That's the world of the authenticator. Being explicit and literal. You know, when it comes to communication, it's taking all the stuff, the theory, the thoughts, and being able to communicate that, not just so that it's visible and tangible and out there for people to understand, but doing it in a way that really makes sense. In fact, I would say to you that if I was to give you the white belt genius of the Authenticate Drive, and I'm not sure, to be totally honest with you, which is what you authenticators want, I'm not sure that we've yet really nailed the geniusness of the Authenticate Drive. I have a feeling that there's uncharted territory here for this drive, that for all we do understand it, I think there's even more that continues to unfold. And I'm going to share some things with you that maybe sound, you know, like wonderful for that drive, but in my heart of hearts, I feel like there's more to uncover with this drive. And I'd be really interested to, you know, if anyone sees some of this even today, to share it. But I've been on a mission to sort of understand this more, you know. The white belt, that I would tell you is creating the clarity that people can then take action. Like that, you just have a way, authenticators just have a way, excuse me, of articulating the stuff so that people finally get it, and not just get it, but can do something about it. And it's like succinct. I mean, I could spend 10 minutes talking about something and they go, so what you mean is this? And they just come up with a picture like, so you really mean it's like a tree, you know? And it's like, oh, why didn't I think to say that? You know, there's just a condensing down to the essence, but in a way that's not only black and white clear, but I can then do something about it. And it's getting to the point where you can take action. I think that's, for me, I would look at so many experiences with, you know, the authenticators on this call. I think they know who they are, who have been significant in my life, like, you know, Tracy, Greg. I don't want to name too many people because there'll be people I forget to name, but we've had so many conversations over the years where I'll ramble on as a one in Authenticate and they'll just crystallize it in 2 seconds with a picture or a one phrase, and it just gives the essence, and then everyone understands it so that it's irrefutable, like in terms of the understanding, and then we can do something about it. I might just stop there in case anyone has any comments or questions you'd like to just add about this drive.
Paul, I have one. Do you want us to suggest to you some possibilities of what we think the genius is that the drive brings? And whether you've already thought that or wait, you know, like wait, like no, as things come up.
Share it. You know, it will only be valuable for everybody involved. So share it, Greg.
And this again is from inside the cave, right? I think what seems to me that gets appreciated, but not always in the moment, is that we call what everyone else knows, but no one wants to say. And it's a crucial part of anything moving forward. It's the elephant that's stopping the movement of the progress. And we seem to have no filter, and we call it out. And even though it may ruffle things, because elephants do move clumsily, it actually can be the turning point of making it work or not. That's my way of saying it.
Yes. I mean, I had a number of things in that genius category for the authenticator. That's definitely one of them, you know. But I do see, there's a way you guys do it that is sort of brutal honesty that is like, whoa, you know. And as you say, it gets the essence of the issue on the table. I do see other people do it from time to time, and that's why I didn't want to just call it out specifically for that. And I didn't want it to look like courage, because it's not that you necessarily have the courage, it's that you just can't not do it. You know, like it's your instinct. Even sometimes you guys surprise yourselves with what you put out there. You go, I didn't really mean it to be that offensive, but I just have to say this. I mean, you got to call it, you know.
I think maybe I'll finish with that. That what you just said really ties it in for me, is that there's no agenda for it. We don't have necessarily a reason we're saying it for us. It's like it has to be said, you know, and I think sometimes we get away with things that are really kind of rough because there's no agenda for ourselves. So it doesn't get lost because.
If I may step in, I do think there is an agenda, and I think it's that because we want to see things get done a certain way.
Oh yeah, that
their time on the semantics. Just get to the point finally.
I'm watching your comments in the chat. I mean, everyone's agreeing with it. So I don't disagree that is definitely one of the really beautiful qualities of the Authenticate Drive, and I'm wondering if there's even something richer that, like, you know what I mean, that could be really, really profound. I have something, I have more to share on that a little later. You know, what I will say is one of the comments, one of the pieces that I wanted to cover is what shows up when you do. You know, when you think about when an authenticator walks in the room, what walks in with you. I think it really is what we're talking about here, that the candor, the transparency, the integrity. Like, this is going to be a real conversation. That is just who you guys are. All those of you who have that Authenticate Drive, you know, there's just, and when I think about the people that I know, even my own father, there's just, and it's not because they come in and say things, there's just something about their presence that just, when they walk in, you know that there's no room for BS today. It's like even when they say to you, so how are you? You feel compelled to tell them the absolute truth, because if you don't tell them, they're gonna get it out of you somehow. There's by the look in their eye or something. You know, they've just got to be totally honest, and I love that. But that can be good, and it can be, as Greg said, it can be really ruffling of the feathers as well. You know.
If I can say something, Paul, it's Chris here. That really, really resonates with me as an authenticator. That I have to be, you know, it has to be said that, you know, that if I have to be transparent, I have to have integrity. I can't not be, and I see that as actually possibly a genius as well, because when I'm in integrity sitting with somebody else, it opens up that possibility for them to be in integrity and to so possibly that's another one to consider for your genius.
Well, that's a really good point. I mean, one of my sayings is that vulnerability builds rapport, and that the more, wherever your honesty is at, it sort of sets the temperature for other people to meet you there, which is what Chris is saying. And maybe that's one of the reasons why, because you guys are so willing to, or it's your nature, to just talk at that essence and truth level, it immediately makes it safe for other people to do the same thing. You know, it's pretty cool. Yeah, very cool. Yeah. Okay, let's talk about what you need.
Paul, just before you move on, there was a great comment in the chat about it's not its intention rather than agenda. I think was a call out from a few people there as well. Just getting the right wording.
Yes, and I'm being very specific about the Authenticate Drive. One of the things we'll do after this series on each of the 8 drives finishes, the 8 directions, people want to talk about combinations. And when you start combining like Authenticate with Verify or Authenticate with Improvise, it changes, it puts a different flavor on it, you know. And of course, we are our whole ID. We're not just one instinct. But for the sake of understanding these in more depth, that's why I'm talking to them singularly. And the word intention would be pure of the Authenticate Drive. When you start adding, for example, like in Nathan's case, when you got Verify and Authenticate, now that makes it more agenda, you know. So I'm not going to comment on what everyone shares, but I know that when we are thinking about understanding these drives, we also want to make sure we don't have our own bias on them or our own coloring from what the rest of our ID is. Okay, let's talk about what you need to motivate yourself. So I would say the first thing that really lights the fire of an authenticator is a clear picture. When there's a crystal clear picture of what's needed and what you need to do, that is, you know, one of the most important ingredients. And if you find yourself procrastinating, it's probably because not just you don't understand it, but you can't see the picture. Like the minute you can picture it, you're good. The second thing is the word help. Help is like an undeniable magnet for an authenticator. Whether someone needs help in the surf, whether they need help financially, whether they need help with someone to just, you know, pitch in and physically help, whatever it might be, if you feel it's either you feel it or if you can, they ask for it, everything is in the notion of help. And then there's action, you know, where you can make a real difference, because it's not just about doing anything. It's like helping where you can truly make a difference that only you could have made. I often think of the analogy, in Australia at least, of the surf lifesavers. You know, when someone's out in the surf and they're really in trouble, it's the Authenticate drive that I picture wanting to get, you know, just can't not. If people are saying, but the surf's closed, it's too rough, you know, you're putting your own life at risk to go out and help them. They're like, I'm still going out. You know, like, I have to do this. I have to do this. So one of the people on our team, her name is Alona. She is an 8 in Authenticate. When coronavirus hit, one of her friends rang from the epicenter of everything in New York and said, Alona, we really need help. And that's about all they needed to say. And then she's ringing me saying, Paul, I need to go to New York. And I'm like, you absolutely do. And I'm like, I know it's not safe. She's putting her own body on the line. It wasn't about getting paid or, you know, what would happen to her career here. I mean, she's completely safe from our perspective, but for her fellow countrymen and for the world and for herself, she needed to be where the action was, where the help was greatest, where she had her body right on the line. And I just think that example will stay with me forever. Of it was so compelling. You know, she could not go. And I thought it would have been, for me, cruel to put any obstacle in the way that would prevent her from going. That's how, you know, I'm sure those of you who've got such a strong drive would really resonate with other examples in your life where that is, you know, pulling you. So I'd say that personal call to action where people really need help and where the picture of what you're going to be doing is crystal clear, man, that lights your fire. What makes it really hard is when those ingredients don't exist. And one of the areas I see them so removed is for school kids, you know, and what happens is when a school kid doesn't have those ingredients in place, they're not going to take any action. So they're often, the number of teachers and parents that I have talked to me about their child, and I go, well, he or she is really lazy. Now, there's no such thing as laziness. There's just someone who isn't engaged. And we're not engaged because no one's pushed our buttons. And I don't know whether any of you authenticators had that label at school or with your parents that you're, you know, quote unquote lazy. And then when you get a career where you've now got something that lights your fire, there's no laziness. You're totally active and, you know, useful and productive. But the laziness is really something I have seen a lot of with school kids. And a lot of times it's because they're like, but why am I learning about history? How am I going to use history? It's history. I remember Mitchell, my son, said to me, Dad, history is history. Like, why are we learning about history? And unless we can put it into a context or a format that they can then take it and do something with it, they see the relevance of it for what they can personally use, it's pretty hard for them to get engaged. Like, I remember learning about algebra, learning about adjectives at school with him, you know, and he's like, what is the point of this? You know, like, until they can see how it's going to be relevant and useful, it's hard to engage. So those ingredients to get motivated are really huge. And then the final one I would say to you is promise. I find it really interesting with authenticators that they can be thinking this stuff, but the minute they say it, they have to convert it into action. And so if they make a promise that they're going to do something, you can intend to do it. But if you put the word promise in there and they go, okay, I promise I'm going to do it. I don't know what it is about that word for you authenticators, but man, it's compelling to then, you just can't not honor that promise. Does anyone relate to that?
There's different versions of the word. We don't even have to say the word promise. We just have to look you in the eye. If we say it and we look you in the eye, I'll have that. That's a promise too.
Okay, that's good. Thanks, Greg.
Say it, write it, super deadline oriented. I mean, we'll go to the mat to make a commitment come true.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
From my experience, that promise only comes into play in stride. For me and my experience of life with when authenticators are really out of stride, that promise actually doesn't carry the same weight it does when they're where they need to be and in a good place.
Yeah.
I would agree with that. And can I also say the word should to authenticate, or to me as an authenticate, is just drives me batty. When people say I should, I'm like, no, you either commit or you don't. Do it or don't do it.
You.
Forget it otherwise.
That's that thing about it's the
Probably.
authentic, but they're black and white, and that's because that's what you bring to the table, is getting it that clear. There's no maybes. It's like, is it or not? You know.
Yeah.
Say, Paul, this is Tad. I'm curious. I'm a 5 in Authenticate, but I have always had to know why to become motivated to do something.
That comes from the Verify drive, Tad. That's the 7 in Verify. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Where the two, and it's all, I've loved seeing you on these calls too, Tad. It's nice to have you here. So what often confuses people between the Verify and the Authenticate drive, a Verify needs to know why, and Authenticate needs to know how something works. I was explaining to a really good friend of mine over the weekend that, you know, if someone said to me, how does the car work? I would just say, well, you just put the key in the ignition, turn it, and it works. You know, that is such a superficial explanation to an authenticator, because they actually want to know, how does it work? Like, okay, but you, like from go to woe, basically take the lid off the hood, show me how it all works. And then, you know, once I can see and picture how it all comes together, like when an authenticator says to me, I want to understand, like, how did you build the ID? Or tell me how the ID works. They really mean, it's not about the why, it's about how did you get from that questionnaire to then this result, like the algorithm and the drives. There's understanding all the components, you know? So when and it's not the detail, it's just they want to understand all the components of it and how it works. But it sometimes confuses verifiers who go, well, you want to understand all the details just like me. But it's quite different. It's understanding how all the machinery works. Almost like if someone could sort of slice it all in half and show you how it all works, you know, like a transparent, you know, look at all of the engine and so on, so you can see how it all functions. I as a 1 in Authenticate, I would never look under the bonnet or the hood. I mean, has zero interest in me how things work. I just want it to work.
Yeah, I personally find as an engineer, I write a lot of code, or I spend a lot of time reading code that I use. And I'm going to just state this. I'm a 2 in improvise, so I freaking hate just winging it. And I'm an 8 in verify, so I love knowing that I'm right. And so those two things in combination with me wanting to use Authenticate means I dig into a lot of third-party projects, read their source code to understand how it works, and then I avoid improvising in whatever solution I believe is right. So I think that's a way a lot of my things tie together personally.
Yeah. Yeah.
Hey, Paul, it's Grant. Can I just ask a question on the context of promise? And I thought the way Greg articulated it was magic. Sometimes you don't even need to say the word. It's the look, it's the body language, it's the whatever, it's the unspoken. How does an authenticator rationalize when the promise is broken? Oh. So they physically can't carry through. How does an authenticator rationalize that?
That's a typical verify question.
Sorry, Greg, you named it too well.
Greg, we don't rationalize it. It's devastating. We have to fix it.
Yeah, yeah.
There's no rationalization is like poison.
Yeah, gotcha.
And acknowledge.
It's a major out of stride there.
Yeah.
But Grant, are you saying, how do they rationalize it when they've broken the promise?
Yeah, so say for instance, there's a promise or a commitment to meet someone for a coffee, and they're driving along, and next thing's a car accident, and they can't make it. Like, that's a commitment, that's a promise to do something, to follow through on something. So
we have to fix it as quick as we can.
Yeah, so you make a call.
We got to make it right.
Yeah, gotcha. Yeah.
So promise.
This is Freddie, and I'll just speak for a minute about this because this is very powerful for me. Through my career, 35 years in the high-tech industry and commit over and over, and I would just burn myself out, drive myself into the ground to deliver on everything. But what I've learned over time, now at 73, I am much more careful. If somebody says, will you give me a promise that this is going to happen? I will not. I will say, I can't promise to that, because if I say I will, I'll do whatever to make it happen. So I mean, it's been a great learning for me, and about killed myself with delivering on all those promises. And now I'm much more discerning about what I commit to.
Such a great point, Freddie, and great to see you on the call as well. Been a long time since we talked. How is Seattle?
Yeah.
I think there's times when authenticators make commitments that other people didn't require that level of commitment, where you are turning yourself inside and out to get something done. Because, like, for example, if you said to me, you're going to have it ready for me by Monday, and I go, great, now you just made a promise. I don't really care whether it's Monday or next Wednesday. You spend the whole weekend working on it to turn yourself inside and deliver as promised, and it was unnecessary. So I think that's it's such a great point, to find out whether the promise is as important to the other party as what it is to you, and be more judicious about that point.
So, hey, this is Palani. In my point of view, promise is very personal. If you put it on a paper, if you put it on an email, somebody like attorney looks at it and they can change by arguments. But the word you talk is your promise. Only you are the person can change it. So you have to talk before, even before talking, you have to think 1,000 times, can I commit this promise? And if you think so, you just say the word, that is the promise. You are the only one person can change it. Nobody else can change it. So it's very personal, how you respect your promises.
Thank you, Palani.
Thank you.
Paul, in the gap there, can I ask, just make a comment from this on this theme? If we could see other people's IDs when they're speaking, it makes it really able to tie in the ID and see where the question's coming from, and get to know that person even a little bit more. And because I'm guessing every time someone with no ID on there says something, I go, oh, who just spoke? Which drive just spoke then? And for those that are comfortable.
So what we do, obviously, when you sign in, you can put, as many of you have done, is put your ID in the sign in. I don't know where you do that, but we can maybe make that clearer, Ian, in the registration material.
No, you have to change it on screen, I think.
But then secondly, if your ID isn't up, maybe when you talk, you just say what your ID is, so the rest of us can then understand it. As Greg said, it helps in how you can, how we can interpret and connect with what you're sharing. Okay, let's talk about some of the other strengths of the Authenticate Drive. One of the things that I've seen a lot that I find awesome is the time between making a decision and taking action is the closest thing to zero as you can make it. I just find that incredible. Like, I've had people in workshops say to me, I want to do this with my team. And then I walk back in the door 5 minutes later and go, okay, I've just organized it. Like, talk to this person, make this happen. It's like, I've made the decision. So it's done now. I've already acted, if we're talking about something in a meeting, it'll be the authenticator that says, look, I'll just make the call straight away. Let's get them in here right now. Let's just deal with this like right now, So if it's thought about, it's action. And often if my talking to them helps them understand something and work it through on how they're going to deal with a particular person, then I'll say, look, I'll call them right now and deal with it like in front of me, or it's instantaneous, that moving from thinking about it, talking about it, realizing it, making the decision, and then having the action. That doesn't mean it's always zero time. There might be some things that get in the way and they can't do it straight away, but whatever the smallest amount of time is, they will want to take action. And
I
that's,
gotta hop in here really quick because you are like speaking 100% to like my soul right now. nothing, I promise you, is more agonizing to me than when I've made a decision and I can't act on it immediately. Be that because I have to wait until Monday for arbitrary reasons. And notice that I say arbitrary, right? That's just my frustration. But it's so agonizing to not being able to just act on it because I want to make it right. I want to get us back on track. Whatever it is, I have to do it. And I am that person in the friend group where if there's beef or if there's something going on, I'm calling them. I'm not texting. I'm not hashing this out over 2 hours. I'm calling you. We're solving it in 5 minutes.
wow.
Done. So
Wow.
perfect description of it.
Well, it's interesting to hear your words, Andy, where you talk about it's agonizing. I mean, like, I think it's good for those of us who are not authenticators to hear what's happening to you, you know, as a result of not being able to take that action. That's really cool. I mean, that's a learning for me, hearing you talk with that sort of passion about it, to realize the frustration that causes.
Kind of on that point as well, like this ties in, I find it ties into work stuff as well. For the past several months, I've had multiple projects that I've thrown plans out for and said, I would love to do this to that because it'd be great. And basically I get told, no, we can't. Our priorities are different. You need to work over here. But it's like, I made this thing. I want to go do it and I can't. And it feels like the projects I've been put on, in some cases, haven't had a very clear picture. And when I don't have that, I feel like I'm a freaking Top Fuel dragster with its back end lifted off the ground 10 inches, spinning its wheels. Like, I just want them to touch the ground and I can go far.
Now,
yeah.
Thanks, Nathan. Thank you. I will say, as I think about what you're just saying, Andy, about, you know, the need for that action straight away, I would also just say to you, be conscious that for people who are not, maybe it's even true for other authenticators, but if I was sitting with you, I'm just picturing if we were having dinner together and we're, you know, in this nice energy of connecting with each other and we share an idea and then that person breaks it to go and take action, that could be, whilst it suits you to be taking action, that could actually be offensive to someone else, you know, that you're no longer, would feel like you're no longer present to the energy of that situation, whatever that might be. And I think it's just good to know, part of what we talk about is how are you perceived by other people, you know, and whilst it's great to be really action oriented, taking the action could then cause you to break. So given that you're into building things, you know, just because Verify is driven to get things right doesn't mean they don't create a wrong in order to get it right. You could be breaking a connection in order to get an action somewhere else. I think it's just good to know that. And it could be as simple as just either explaining what you're doing to somebody else and acknowledging the change in energy, or I don't know what else you would do, but I'm just pointing out it could have that effect on somebody else.
I've definitely had that interaction with friends where, like, if I'm trying to sort through something and I have that spark that some of the people in the chat have been talking about, or like be it that idea at 3 a.m. or whatever. Luckily, I do have friends in my life where I'm able to call it out and I'll say, hey, can I have 5 minutes to at least jot down the idea or to create an action plan? And then I promise I'll orient back to this conversation. And using the word promise is what really drags me back over the line to dialing back in. But to your point, though, I have been struggling with that when I'm in a business setting, for example, because I can't always be hanging out with my friends who are very understanding. You know, sometimes you have to be present in the moment, whatever that meeting may be or what have you. So I think it's an excellent point to call out that just because you have that spark of creativity or you have that like action plan going, being aware of how you're showing up to others and needing to have, you know, the authenticity of being in the meeting. And my brother tells me, you know, when you're in the meeting, be in the meeting. So, which is a quote from Hitch for those who have watched the movie, but good advice.
If I may, though, I'll pick on Paul for a moment because I see you're in 8-1. Part of this is two-way. I might be an authenticator and really got to say something in the meeting. But if I see I'm working with Paul there and he's a 1, I can temper my expectations too. So I think, you know, I don't worry necessarily so much about what I am, but I'm more worried about what you are when I'm working with you. And from there, I can adjust either my approach or my expectations. And I think that works especially with people that work for you.
Thanks, Larry. Okay, so let's talk about, you know, another dimension. What demotivates the authenticators is, well, I often say, I was telling this this lady on Saturday, just the weekend just gone, we were talking about her ID, and she is an authenticator, and I was saying there's virtually no way that someone could offend you by telling you the truth. Even down to the point if, you know, she had something stuck in her teeth or she had bad breath or something, I said, if someone said to you, you know, you need to take something for your breath, you've got something stuck in your teeth, how would that land? And she gave me this look like, why would someone not tell me that? Like, if that's what the reality, like, why would they not say that? Like, I would rather know so I can do something about it. And I said, what would offend you and embarrass you and hurt you is if they didn't tell you, right? And she said, oh my God, I would die if someone didn't tell me that, you know? And for an avoid authenticator, it's the opposite. It's like when that stuff's pointed out, it can be really embarrassing. But on the other hand, you'd feel like you do want it pointed out, but it still can be embarrassing. But to her, there was no issue. It was just tell me, and then I can do something about it, and we're good, you know? I find that really interesting because so often people are saying to me, I need to have a conversation with so-and-so, and I don't know how to present it, you know? And I'm thinking through what I'm going to say. I'm like, just say it. Just say it. The fact that you're delaying having that conversation is what's offending them, not what you're going to say. The thought that someone is sitting there harboring these thoughts, feelings, concerns, fears, whatever it might be, and not just being upfront and putting them on the table. Even in like a marriage, you could say to someone, you know, I've fallen out of love with you. And you feel like that could be one of the most brutal things to say. Yes, it might be brutal, but if the authenticator now knows, they can do something about it. Whether it's cleaning it up, whether it's ending it, it doesn't matter. But the point is, let's get it on the table and we can do something about it. So I want to be really clear that it doesn't mean that they don't get upset, that they don't have feelings, but it's far more offensive to not have it on the table. You know, that's really crucial.
Hey, this is Palani again. I have a quick question. Do you have a checklist before making a promise? Can I go through the checklist? Hey, okay, I'm okay to make a promise and I can keep it. Thank you.
Well, I'm not quite sure what you mean, Palani. I mean, if my understanding is an authenticator makes a promise, it's done. So there's no need.
I understand. Let us say the authenticator tried to make a promise and he wanted to make a promise workable, make it possible. So is there a checklist the authenticator again can go through and make sure his promise is going to work? Like, do you have any suggestions or any checklist, like, hey, you make sure your promise is achievable?
Palani, are you an authenticator?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, well, I would imagine if you've made the promise, you wouldn't make the promise if you couldn't see how you would make it work. So I don't know that you would need a checklist that way. You might want to be clear with people on what it is you're promising, but once you've made that promise, I can't imagine you would do that if you weren't clear on what it is you're going to deliver.
Okay.
Sounds like there's some other drives operating here in a few comments that we if it's a 6, I'll admit, as an 8 in Authenticate, when I hear a 6 talking, I go, yeah, okay, maybe. I can be pretty rough, you know, it's like, but when I've got a 7 somewhere else or an 8 somewhere else, I go, yeah, that's going to have to be fed first before you feed that little 6. He's the runt of the litter.
Yeah, if I can just jump in there as well, because a number of people have made comments about, you know, it depends on the way it's delivered or what's said, or, you know, it's how it's said, and those things are important. I think a lot of them, you know, come from other drives. You know, as a 4763, I don't like conflict and like to keep things in harmony or whatever. But again, I think if you peel all those things back, take all those away, you get to the essence of you'd rather know than not know, and that's that's the piece that is the purely authenticate piece. It would be worse to be told, you know, not at all than told harshly and brutally. But the preference, of course, would be if people did it nice and constructively and talked about next steps and moving forward.
Yeah. Thanks, Krista. All right. A vulnerability. So that in terms of what demotivates you, I mean, I've mentioned like clearly people aren't being upfront with you if they're lying to you. Lying is the work. That just is like, got to get rid of that relationship. And I've said to people, it's like a faulty light switch. If I went over and flicked the light switch and today it didn't work, and I flicked it again and it started working, and it works now for the rest of the day and for the next week, in the back of my mind, it's like, yeah, but there's something wrong with that light switch. And that's what happens in a relationship. If you lie to an authenticator, it's, you know, you can repair and make do, but there's always this scar that's there. And depending on how big the scar is and how many of them are there, you get to a point where you go, you know what, we could repair that light switch, but it's probably better we just replace the light switch. And depending on how scarring a conflict like that occurs or a lie occurs in a relationship, you get to a point where you go, I'm probably better off just changing relationships. Now, in a marriage, I know there are marriages where people have said we've had a really significant thing happen. You know, it could be an affair, it could be a big lie, it could be some other significant issue, and they will do a lot of work to repair, and they get to a place where they decide to go forward, but there would still be a scar. You can't remove it altogether, you know, and depending on how many of them there are, as I say, they might then make a more significant change. I know for me, one of the things we talk about is verbal contracts. You know, if I said to someone, I'll call you in 20 minutes, 20 means 20. And if you don't call them, that's not just that you let the person down or you basically lied. Not basically, you lied. I mean, there's what you said you would do, there's what didn't happen, there's a difference, equals lie. And there are, you know, versions of those, but when you look at what happens over time, we establish there are these verbal contracts floating around in relationships, like a legal contract, that if you violate it, there's going to be big consequences. And what was staggering to me was as an avoid authenticator, I didn't know I was signing a contract, and the authenticator didn't realize that I wasn't signing a contract. So there's this complete misunderstanding. I'm being held accountable to something that I never signed. And I, you know, I mean, it works both ways. So just being able to have that conversation up front and say, so how specific? So if I said to someone, I'll have this for you early next week, and I'm talking to an authenticator, now I know to be, you know, really more clear about that. Like, I'll have it to you by Wednesday, you know, not early or first thing next week, because first thing next week literally means the first thing Monday morning. And so where is it? And it's just logical for them to go there, you know, to sort of say, well, you did say first thing next week. Yep. But first thing to an authenticator literally is the first thing. To an avoid authenticator, it's, you know, somewhere before Wednesday at noon. There's a bloody big discrepancy there, you know. So that plays out in relationships. So these verbal contracts are things to be really careful of. The other thing I would call out is when people are venting to an authenticator, it's your instinct to want to jump in and help. And the person may not be wanting your help, may not even need help. They're just sharing. And I think there's times when you take action or feel it as a request for help, a cry for help, and it can cause conflict, because people then think, well, why are you doing this? Why are you giving me advice? Why are you taking action? Why are you jumping in? I didn't need any of that. It's like, well, you're just complaining about it. Yeah, I was complaining, but I got it all under control. I didn't need you to do anything. And I think it's really, as authenticators become more self-aware of this element, they can say, so I'm hearing a lot of stuff here. Do you want me to do anything, or is the doing that you need just to listen to you? And even if I said to someone up front, can you just hear me out? I don't need you to do anything. I just need to get this off my chest, but I need someone I can talk to safely. Can you be that person? It's like, okay, now that I know, it's like I can play that role, but until you told me that, I would have taken action.
Paul, I wanted to ask Joe, I'm curious about what you mean by lying to yourself. That's an interesting comment because it's not always just external.
That was in the chat, was it?
Yeah.
Yeah. I was saying that it's when you lie to yourself, because it was just before you're talking about when you're demotivated and when you know you're out of integrity with yourself. It's the worst for us, because that really paralyzes us, and we have to clean it up before we can move on and feel comfortable. That's what
When you're lying to yourself, Joe, do you know you're lying to yourself?
Oh yeah. I mean, when you're trying to, it's not even lying. It's really trying to kid yourself is probably one of your better words. So you say something or you mean something, but you know you're not in integrity with yourself and what your values are. It's like if I'm not in alignment with my own values, I'm really demotivated.
Right. So I want to move on to another separate component of this, which is in the self-doubt space. Every instinct has things that will cause them to have, a lack of confidence. And I don't just mean criticism from other people. I'm talking about the voices in your own head that hold you back, and they're different for different drives. But I would say the way I would describe it for the authenticator is around identity. Whatever identity you have of yourself, whatever the voices are and the picture you have of yourself, so that will become your reality on the outside. So when someone is trying to be, say for example, someone was trying to lose weight, if they've got a picture of themselves that they're a big person, if that's their identity and if that's how they're known, the chances of them being able to lose that weight just by saying I'm losing weight are really hard, because there's the picture on the inside has to be the same as the picture on the outside. That's what Authenticate is. And therefore it's not going to happen. I remember this guy owned a butcher shop called Big Kev's Meats, and Big Kev was big. And he used to have the yo-yo diet because he, was so big, doctors would warn him that he wasn't going to last. So he'd go on a diet and he'd lose all this weight. And then not very long at all, he'd get back to his original weight. And I thought, well, if he was an authenticator, and I'm not saying he was, but if he was an authenticator, it would be really hard for him to keep that weight off, because he's Big Kev. And whatever he's Big Kev and that picture in himself, he's not going to be able to have a discrepancy between how he sees himself on the inside and who he is on the outside. If I'm saying that I, want to give up smoking, but I picture myself having a cigarette when I'm out with friends on a Friday night, it's going to be really hard for me to give up smoking. But if I change that and put a new picture in place, like now when someone says to me, hey, Paul, are you coming down for a cigarette? And instead of just going down there, I've got a new picture in my mind of what I am going to do. Now I can do that picture. There's every chance I'm going to give up smoking. And I'd say that's the same about whether it's wealth creation. If you think of yourself as, well, I've always struggled with money. The identity I have of myself is I'm always going to be poor. I'm always going to struggle in relationships. That's my identity. That will always make it hard for you to then have something different on the outside. So changing the identity and that self-talk on the inside is crucial to then being able to make the shift occur on the outside.
Paul, are we going to touch anything about the way we're such a pain in the ass to people?
You are, Greg?
I'm saying, the vulnerabilities of this drive can be devastating. And I was just wondering, are we going to give everyone else some tips?
Well, yes, and learn as well. So we can talk about that. I just wanted to, let's come to that next. Does anyone have anything on identity that they wanted to ask? Particularly, you might even be struggling with yourself.
Couple of comments in the chat, Paul. Just Nathan was saying he's lost weight, but so he says it's about vision that drives success. So might want to respond to that.
So if I may, I think that at the end of the day, I agree with you, Paul. It's just that I hadn't heard the part of, well, Big Steve needed to change who Big Steve thinks Big Steve is.
Yes.
And like that, I made my comment before you got there. So realistically, I agree with what you had to say. You do need a vision, and you'll change yourself to conform with it.
Yes. Yes.
So this is Freddie, and I actually have a personal example of what you're saying, and I'll try to make it really short. But I grew up in Utah in a Mormon family, and everyone around me, all the women were very heavy and overweight and not healthy. And so I grew up with this thought that no matter what I did, I was doomed to be a blimp, you know, basically that. And I yo-yoed my weight in that all through college. But then I came to a point where I knew what I needed to do to be healthy. And so my number one value for 50 plus years has been my health. And so I am so wired to do what's healthy that at 73, I'm like as healthy as I've ever been. And I still ski and I golf and I run and I do all those things and I eat well. And it was a huge mind shift for me that I just live to this day. But it could have gone otherwise because I have sisters who didn't get it.
Very cool. So let's talk about, I want to cover the how others perceive you. Greg's point about, you know, let's talk about how we come across, and then I'll cover another element of genius, and then we're going to have to probably wrap for the day. So let's talk about how you come across. Of course, you come across as direct. You know, at the nth degree of that would be brutal. But I'm not sure that it's necessarily destructive. It might be temporarily, but often you have to break in order to rebuild and have a renewal. You know, it's like Easter. You can't have the Sunday without the Friday. And often there needs to be that sort of breaking in order to have the growth. You know, it's like trimming back a plant in order to have the growth. So brutal can be brutal, but I'm not sure that it's necessarily destructive. The one that I would say is a hidden element of how you come across is you can be seen as a political animal. And I find that really interesting because of all the IDs, of all the drives that you think is the straight shooter, and it is the authenticate drive. But it's interesting in teams and at leadership levels, I've often had people say to me that the authenticator is a political animal. They're really cunning. They've got these different agendas and, you know, they're coming from, you've really got to watch out for them. And I'm like, seriously? And there was this guy who was the CEO of a hospital near me a few years back. And he was the most straight shooting Scottish authenticator you could get. And he was perceived as this political animal. And I'm like, how is it so? And they said, well, he goes down, because it's a walk around style of leadership. And he goes downstairs and he'd be talking to the receptionist and saying, so how's everything going? And he was just talking to the receptionist, being straight up. But when he left, someone would come up and say, what did Jerry want? You know? And they're like, nothing. He was just checking on how I am and how's everything going. They're like, okay, so he's getting to you too. You know, now you're not allowed to divulge, you know? And because the people are like, but did he have anything else to say? No, nothing. It was all, okay, so you're part of his gang. And they would just read into all this stuff and it became this political mess. And he didn't realize that by him going and just talking to anyone rather than staying in his ivory tower the way predecessors had been, it was like he was on a witch hunt. He was out doing his own, you know, skip level checking with people. And he just thought he was this nice guy walking around doing walk around management, connecting with all the team. But the people before him had been so political, he was being, you know, thrown into an area that was just so not him. So it's not that you are political, but I think it's, you've got to be really cognizant of the landscape you're on and how other people might be perceiving it, and more the point, misperceiving what you're doing. The other thing I would add is you can be perceived as taking things really personally when people didn't mean it to be as personal, you know, just because you take things literally. And it could be as simple as saying, you know, you're hopeless, and you don't rationalize it. You just hear that you're hopeless, take it literally. And the person might mean you're hopeless at one thing, or just in this moment, I'm saying that to get something off my chest. But you can be really cut by expressions that people didn't realize how hurtful and literal they were being. It could be interpreted, you know. And so it is often perceived as the drive that takes things really personally. And it's more that you just take it really literally. And if people realized the words they were using, they'd probably want to retract them. So it's not, that's really the disconnect there. Greg, what would you add? You know your ID really well in terms of how it lands brutally for other people. What is it that you wanted to share on that?
What we tend to teach in our workshops is that give the authentication, okay, you're going to do it, but sometimes it's like throwing a hand grenade in. And what I often tell my other authenticates is just do what you're going to do, but stay and take the heat of what you just caused. Like, stick around. Don't just do the mic drop. Oh, I told the truth. My work's finished here. You know, but so when we stir the pot, but like stick around and help put things back together rather than just wear this badge of, oh, I told the truth. You know, that to me is that finishes the job. Don't just stir it up, but help fix it.
Okay. Thank you. That's really good. Okay, so with a couple of minutes left, let's talk about the this genius piece. The part that I find really incredible is, and I'd like some authenticators maybe to talk to what happens here for you, is how do you take something that is all confusing to others and you come up with this succinct way to get to the essence of it and express it so clearly? I'm guessing that there's not a lot of thinking, it just is, in the same way it occurs for the other 7 directions. But it's profound in terms of the waffling that can appear to be going on with whether people call it brainstorming or discussion or thinking it through. But then it's you probably need it. I don't know whether you needed to hear all that to then synthesize it, or whether you can just, you saw it at the beginning and you just put it on the table. But there's something about being able to crystallize it, because it's not just clarity. I was talking about this with Tracy Kennedy earlier. It's not just clarity, it's clarity at like an irrefutable level that then compels the action. But how do you get there? Do you need to hear all of the discussion first to then synthesize it? Or does it just occur to you right at the beginning?
Can I just talk to that, Paul? So when I'm listening to my clients and they're waffling or whatever you want to call it, they're talking about a lot of things, there'll be a point that it'll just be completely crystal clear. So yes, for me, it's part of the discussion, but often I can either get the point really clearly early, or it might take a little bit of time, but there'll be a point in the conversation that'll just go bing.
But do you have a bing, is what I'm saying? Is there a point where you go, this is so clear to me, there's a, you know, whether it's a visceral or a resonance of something where you go, this is clear? Does that occur?
Yeah, it's what I'm saying. It just goes bing. It's like this light goes on, and it's like, and this gut, and it's just like, yeah, I know what it is. And then when I bring it to the fore, so people have always said to me, Joe, you've got an incredibly good ability to just help me see what's important and see the wood through the trees. So I come to you with a mishmash of stuff, and I have no idea what to do next, and I walk out with 2 or 3 action plans, and this is what I'm going to do.
So can I implore you authenticators to call that out when that happens? Because what my experience is that someone will be in a meeting and then the authenticator says, well, I don't know, I just think we should do X, you know, and it's almost like a throwaway line. And I can tell, because I know it's the authenticator, that was the gold nugget right there, but it's not presented as a gold nugget. It's almost like they've got the piece of gold and they just throw it on the table and say, here, I've got this in case anyone wants to use it. And people don't realize the gold that it is. And I think if you could be more intentional, you know, clear about the fact, guys, this is what I'm seeing, and you know, this is it. That would just save so much time and give even the confidence to people to move forward. But they really value what that instinct brings to the table so much more. Because I think I experience it occurring, but not where it's presented with that significance.
I think Greg's got a really good point in the chat. Greg, if you wanted to just make your point.
The one about what gets my attention, the dissonance gets my attention. With what you're talking about, the genius, where we come up with it, what we're doing now isn't matching up what we're here to do. And so that dissonance between what we're doing literally and what we're here to do is like, I can't be quiet. And then the next thing, the obvious thing is how to put them together. And I think some of the genius comes from just trying to reconnect those wires that came apart.
Okay. Okay. Well, I do think this thing about seeing the real issue and keeping it real, I mean, that to me in any team is the gift that you all bring. You know, it's just a wonderful compass that keeps everyone true. I think that's very cool. Guys, I know we're out of time. I'll put all of the things we've referred to today, I'll put into that table and share it on our website, and as will the video. And next week we're going to get into the avoid, authenticate, drive, and then work through the others in the ensuing weeks, complete and then improvise. So thank you for being there today. I hope there's little pieces of gold in here that help you understand it more, the authenticate, drive, and get some good use out of it for yourself or the people in your world who are wired that way. Have a great day. Thanks for being here. We'll see you next week.
Thank you,
Thanks, Paul.
Thanks, Paul.
Thanks, Paul.
Thanks, Paul.